welcome to my latest painting tutorial. This time we're going to be looking at the green armour for Mortarion of the Death Guard. You can see an example on the screen at the moment for what we're going to be doing. Also you'll notice that there is a golden trim on the armour, and that will be the next video that I focus on after this one. In a moment you're going to be seeing the paints we're using. I've managed to limit it to purely Games Workshop paints, so there's the Ceramite white, Death Guard green, Ushabti bone, and finally Incubis darkness. The main colour is Death Guard green, which will already have been sprayed onto the model before. Again, I did use an airbrush to quickly put that down. You don't need to use an airbrush, you can paint it by hand, it won't make any difference. Just for speed that I did it. So I'm going to be starting off using Ushabti bone straight on top of the Death Guard green, and it's going to be a very rough process. You can see the paint at the top left. It's just the three to the right of the box. So the top is Death Guard green, below that Ushabti bone, below that Ceramite white, and below that on the right is Incubis darkness. Ignore any of the other paints that you can see. You can see that I'm applying it very roughly, and also you will have noticed when I started off that I was using the side of the brush, and this is purely to go over the details. You can see there's some corrosion on the armour there, and I don't want any of the Ushabti bone colour to go inside those holes, so just using the side of the brush, quickly painting over it, catches the edges of the detail, so you're already getting a quick and dirty highlight there. But the general aim is to not get a smooth finish on this. I know that sounds a bit strange, but I want all the details and roughness, because it is a Nurgle Death Guard piece, and I don't think it suits it to have a very clean looking armour. So as you can see, there's all sorts of patches and things there. Now as we go along with different paint layers and things like glazes and stuff like that, it will soften some of these textures and things, so don't worry if it looks a bit rubbish at this stage. But what you do want to pay particular attention to is the lighting direction. So for the whole model, I'm doing the lighting from the top left. You can see there is a ridge down the centre of the knee, and that will make a shadow directly next to that ridge. You can see I'm also doing the lip at the bottom of the knee, again still with the Ushabti bone. This will catch most of the light. I'm not going to paint on too many specific shadows, because it'll be just a headache working them all out. So shadows from things like, there's a small spike on the front of the knee. I won't be painting shadows for things like that in. But general shadows on the curves of the armour will make it look more interesting. You can see again the paint is fairly watered down. So what will happen is when you apply the paint, it will dry darker than when you first see it. And to counteract that, you just do multiple layers, and that will work almost like a transition. So on the right hand side of the knee here, I'm doing some very gentle painting on. That it needs to show that there's some light hitting that side as well, but it's quite tricky to understand that although the light's hitting the top left and then it put the shadow directly next to that ridge, it still needs some light on the other side of that that will represent reflected light and things like that, because otherwise you just have half of your model in shadow, which could be quite interesting, but it's not the look I'm going for this. The reason I'm using such a small brush for applying these things is so that I can do these rough little details like the small dimples and things like that, and it also helps to facilitate the rough texture because it's lots and lots of small little marks and those build up and you get this kind of rough texture. So you can see here I want the build up of the paint to be more towards the centre of the knee. You'll see as I go along how I achieve that with the paint position. And what I did there was I applied too much paint because I didn't wipe it off my thumb. On this video you can actually see how I'm taking the paint off my thumb before I apply it to the model. So I'm not going to be using that much of the Death Guard green because obviously the base colour is already down. However, it is really useful to have there on the wet palette because if you make mistakes it allows you to go over them, and it also allows you to blend in some of the colours. So the Ushabti bone is quite light compared to the Death Guard green, so just without even changing the paint on your brush, so you don't have to wash it off, you can just dip the paintbrush into the Death Guard green and create a sort of a soft blend between the colours. So you're looking for getting these details into to represent the texture on the armour. But at the same time, you don't want it to just be very harsh all the time, and you don't want the paint to be too thick. It's a careful balance. So as I was saying, using the small paintbrush allows you that bit more control. Just using the tip, just putting these little tiny marks down. Without having too much paint on the brush, you've got much more control of the outcome. Now if you wanted to paint this for a tabletop army, you don't even need to use white. I think it would look fine just to spray the model's Death Guard green and then use your Ushabti bone to quickly do this quick pitted texture, because it's quite effective using the light direction. It looks good from a distance, and it's only you only need the rest of the details and the shadows and things like that for really when you're picking up a model and looking at it closely. So just using the tip of the brush and picking out the details on those holes in the armour as well. So the easiest part was painting that top left section with the extra details on. The hardest part is painting on the right hand section because there aren't any details there. What happens is the details kind of do the work for you, so you just have to paint them, whereas when you paint the other side without any of these pits in the armour, it looks very smooth and blank, so you have to work much harder, and especially because it has to look much softer light and be in shadow as well. Now this section here that I'm painting, I'm not going to spend too long on this area because this actually goes underneath his cloak. It's a little bit annoying actually for this model that most of the armour is actually covered in cloak. Especially because I like the armour quite a lot, but it is worth it for a competition painting just to spend a bit more time painting all these bits that would be hidden, because they can be kind of spotted from if the judges tilt the model slightly and just peer into the gaps and things like that. So unpainted sections do get marks deducted. So here you can see I'm doing a little bit of an edge highlight on the top of the ridge, just to emphasise the shape of that there. There is a hard line on the model anyway, so it doesn't hurt to pick that out. If you notice on the top left as well, the Ushabti bone has built up to be quite a strong layer now. There's not much transparency left, showing the Death Guard green underneath. But of course, the Ceramite white will be going on top of that, where you can do the same process again, it just and bring back some of that detail. So if you notice towards the bottom curve of the knee now, I'm not actually putting in much at all in the way of the Ushabti bone, and this area is going to be shaded in later on with the Incubi darkness, but the Incubi darkness will be applied as a glaze, so it's important still at this stage to paint in some of these details, and even if they look quite harsh on the model, they will soften in when the glaze goes over the top. Okay, the inside of the knee here is mainly covered, and actually there is a slight indentation that I start to paint on the knee joint there, which actually isn't the shape of the armour. That indentation shows where the model connects onto another part of the model. So this will be completely invisible because it's going to be glued. There's no need to paint this section, but I didn't realise that at the time. One of the dangers of painting models in sections like this is that you will get the lighting and wrong, and you'll paint sections that will be glued. On the other hand, it is really handy to paint the model in sections because it gives you much greater access. As I mentioned, there's a large cloak that goes over all of the armour on this model, and I was contemplating gluing it all together and painting it afterwards, but if I did that, I wouldn't be able to reach most of these sections with a paintbrush, and it would look quite unfinished from certain angles because you just wouldn't be able to get the paintbrush in there. It'll also make, even if you do manage to paint most of the areas that you can see when it's glued together, it still makes your life much harder because you can't get the angles with a paintbrush properly to do the nice brush strokes that you want. You might end up just jabbing at things that are like hidden away in the hard to reach areas, and so it won't be such a nice finish on the model. So now on to the Ceramite white section. So it's going to be exactly the same process that I used with the Ushabti bone. You have to excuse me the names, I have to keep pausing to look at the parts. The names are a little bit new to me. I'm more familiar with things like skull white and bleach bone, but there we go. So it's carrying on doing the same process as before, but in a reduced area. So you don't want to completely go over all the Ushabti bone that you've already painted on. You need to keep some of those details lower down. This is only the very top section where the most light's hitting. And again, on these details, it's only the very bottom sections now that are just catching this, these white highlights. They look quite thick in the video, but remember this is much more zoomed in than you actually see it in real life, so they are fairly thin lines, and again, as it progresses you neaten these up as well. So not just the sculpted on details will be highlighted, but also the some of the dark areas that you left on when painting on the Ushabti bone. because they then work as shallow dints on the armour as well. And again, I don't want a perfectly smooth finish in any of these bits. I want it to look so it's all indented and corroded and things like that. So now I have to very carefully put in some highlight in the middle section. It should still match the lighting position on the other side of the knee, because it's a global light source, but the problem is because there's much more of the Death Guard green visible on this section of the knee, the tonal contrast is much higher when applying this white. So basically what that means is the paint marks are very strong. So you have to carefully blend all these in, put into a much smaller area. I'm not sure if I can completely achieve it during the whole process of the video, but there will be a photograph at the end, because it can take quite a long time to keep going over and over these sections until you're happy with it, but you'll get the general idea. It's just lots and lots of very small marks blending in just using those four colours. So again, I'm picking out the details in white on this side, on the right hand side of the knee, which is brighter than they need to be. Sorry, but again, this section is going to be quite heavily shaded with the Incubi darkness, so having the bright highlights doesn't matter too much. In fact, it actually helps because it allows them to still show through after you've glazed over them. Whereas if you just did a very soft highlight, that would almost vanish after you put a few glazes over it. So the front of the knee, it's not a perfectly straight line going down, because what happened is when I clipped this section off the model, the small amount of damage you can actually see on the right hand side of the centre line. There's this bit of damage that I painted on there that actually is damage from where they attached to the sprue, and what that has meant is that it's not a perfectly straight line going down the knee, but it doesn't matter too much because again it just shows more damage than the model would have in game terms or lore, if you know what I mean. So I'm just pulling down, taking a few steps back using the earlier colours, the Ushabti bone and the Death Guard green, just to pull those colours a little bit further down, to emphasise even more that the left hand side of the knee is getting more light. Sometimes it's not necessary to have it perfectly accurate as light sources, but just so that it looks good on the model as well. So you can see there that there's a very rough but interesting looking sort of blending going on, so there's not been any special blending techniques at all. It's just lots and lots of small marks on the paintbrush. And also dipping the brush into different paints without washing it off, because then that mixes the two colours together and gives you a transition colour. There's a lot of fiddling with this kind of painting, going backwards and forwards until you get something that looks how you want it to. Sometimes there's a danger of playing with it too much before you've got to the next stage where the shadows will make a big difference to how it looks. And you have to sometimes remember that you've got to plan ahead with how it's going and not just try and make every stage perfect. I'm just watering down the white a bit further. I've been using a Masterson's wet palette. It has quite a few pros and cons to the homemade one that I've used for many years. Part of the cons, or one of the cons, is that the paint dries quicker because there's not as much water in the palette. There's only like a couple of millimeters of sponge, so the paint doesn't stay as wet and the paper is much thicker. However, there are lots of benefits to using this paper, one of which I particularly like is that the paper is much harder, so you can keep mixing paint on there for a long time and the paintbrush will not go through, the paper won't wear away. It's very hard wearing, and also the paper stays perfectly flat. So what that means is there are no bumps in the paper where bits of paint will dry quickly, which is always a pain for me with the standard wet palette. You would always get ripples in it in areas depending on how wet a section of the paper was. So this removes all of those sort of issues. So the paint, none of the paint on this Masterson wet palette actually completely dries out. So though it may go to a thicker state quicker than a standard wet palette, it will stay in a non-dry state for a much longer time. So I've just been carrying on doing the same thing, going backwards and forwards with the three main Armour colours there. So now I've made a glaze. I've managed to fit that onto the main screen for you. And this is where we start adding some shadow to the Armour. So it's just a case of I've done a video showing you how to make a glaze. In this case, it's heavily watered down ink by darkness. You load up the brush, then you rub it on some kitchen towel till there's hardly any paint coming off. Then you just do a thin layer on the model. I've also got in the wet palette, you can see there's some thicker ink by darkness that's going in all of the holes on the Armour, because these will be heavily shadowed. I especially want them dark because later on I'll be adding a yellow dot in the centre of them for a little bit of interest, and that'll contrast really nicely against the dark Incubi colour. One thing to note on this video as well is because I have the light so bright and it's so zoomed in, you can see it looks perhaps rougher than the painting does in real life. All these marks and things are very, very small in reality. So it's important to be aware of that when you see. You might think it looks quite rough, the painting, but when you see it in reality, these all look like really, really fine details. So the whole of the underside of the curve of the knee has this Incubi darkness glazed into it. Don't glaze over any of the white areas. Right, as I paint over this in the white area. The right hand side of the knee needs a shadow going down that slightly to the right of that centre line. And I'm also using the glaze on the top to pull back, to add depth to the shape. You'll see as I keep going along how the shape of the knee will slowly pop out more by adding these darker areas. Another important thing to remember is all the trim on these thigh plates and the shin plates. This will all be painted in that gold non-metallic metal effect, and it has a very dark edge to it. So that will frame all of this paint, all of this pale armour painting. So what I'm doing here is being a bit lazy and using Incubi darkness straight from the palette and putting that into the deepest shadow on the lower curve. You have to be a bit careful doing this because you're more likely to get very obvious brush marks doing it, but I knew I wanted it to be quite dark anyway, and this is just a lot quicker, and then I can add more glazes layer as I progress, just to soften in those transitions. So you can see on the right hand side of the knee there how the shadow goes up higher, because obviously it's less light catching it. It really emphasises the light on the top left, so it's kind of like into quarters, with top left light, bottom right dark, and then there's still that curve going all the way around the knee as well to show the circular shape of it, or spherical. Right? Now, if you wanted to make this really smooth looking and highly polished type looking armour, it's exactly the same process, but you just do use the other colours and use glazes of those to bring all of the stages together. You really soften down all of the texture work and make it look very refined, but that's not the look that I'm going for this piece. However, this section here does still need work. It looks too brush marky. As I mentioned before as well, because of the lighting and the setup that I'm using here for recording it, it's quite high contrast, so it's really emphasising the brush marks and things I'm doing, so it allows you to see them more clearly, but it's they're not quite as obvious in real life. You can see much more clearly the damaged area I was talking about for where the knee was connected to the sprue that it was cut from. Now for these details, I'm picking them out again using the Ushabti bone colour, but you have to be much more careful to keep them neat now, because there's not going to be lots of layers going on top of them again. So you can see the process I'm using. I keep going backwards and forwards, changing things as I go along, and having that wet palette there and having the well palette next to me and everything. So I have all the colours ready to use at all times, so I can make changes as I go along, which is a big benefit than if you're just using a tile and putting the paints on there. It's much harder to make corrections and change your mind as you paint, because the paint will dry quickly and you have to keep applying it from the pot, things like that. Because this section of the trim is a bit more in shadow as well, I've added a bit more Incubi darkness on this side, just to again push that top left light, bottom right dark look to the piece. So you can do the same thing with the Deathguard green, and Incubi darkness, as I was using with Deathguard green and Ushabti bone, is that you can just dip the paintbrush into the colours without washing the brush, and then applying it quickly on, and it will blend on the model. So what I'm just doing here This is how they bring back a few more textures again, because all those layers of Incubi Darkness really soften down the texture to the point that they're almost invisible again. So that kind of looks odd on the model, especially because the texture's in what would be a fairly light area in comparison to the shadows at the bottom at least, but without the texture on it anymore. So again, just highlighting those little marks I've just put on as well. So we're just about coming to the end of the video now. There is a photograph at the end which will show you the knee in its almost finished form. I still want to do a few more touches up to it, but you'll see that I've painted in the little yellow dots and added a couple of streaks of Mortarion brown to come from the holes. So the yellow paint will be Uriel yellow as well, in case you want to do the same thing. So there's the final shot here. It's using the same camera. You can see the how much softer it looks in not direct sunlight, direct lamplight. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.